Okay, welcome everyone to the phenomenosophy discussions. Tonight we are discussing a war on morality. We will discuss how the rhetoric of institutions like academia, media, etc., has been weaponized to dismantle morality, how culture is being undermined by immorality and the destructive effects on society, and how we can counter this immorality movement with our intention, attention, and the embodiment of principles. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to be going through lists of various moral virtues and their, I guess what I would call their counterpoints. Their, what do they call it? They don't call them, what's the opposite of a virtue? I know there's a word for it. Can't think of it right now. A what?
Vice. A vice.
Yeah, we'll call it a vice. Yeah, we'll call it a vice. I feel like there's another word for it, but vice is good. So we're going to go through each virtue and show how in our culture and society, the opposite of each of these virtues is actually being pushed and focused on, and that has the effect of demoralizing people and dehumanizing people as well. So we're going to see how, not only how it's being done, but how we can counter it. Okay, so I wanted to start off with gratitude and grievance. Now this one's an easy one because I'm sure you all can spot grievance in society now, right? This is why they're able to and so successful with pushing critical theories, right? It's based in grievance, right? And to me, one of the most ridiculous concepts is historical grievance, which, is basically not something that necessarily happened to you, but it happened to maybe some past ancient relative. And so now you're pissed because of something that happened to some ancient relative. But they're pushing it, right? They're pushing grievance. And it's not only the people who are adopting grievance as a principle, right? They're actually living in that grievance, but it's also causing a counterbalance to that, where you're also getting people who do not buy into these ideologies also attaching themselves to grievances as well, focused in. Their mindset is in grievance. And
real quick, this was supportive for me to look at the definition of grievance, just to be clear. It's a real or imagined wrong or another cause for complaint or protest, especially an unfair treatment. So this isn't something that even needs to be, it didn't need to happen. It could be imagined, or it could just be anything that you take as a reason to complain.
Excellent. I didn't even know about the imagined part, but I mean, it makes sense because it's perceptual. Right?
Exactly.
I mean, if you're grieved, it's based on your perceptions or interpretations of something. So it definitely could be, most likely is imagined, right?
Like whether or not their ancestors actually suffered makes no difference on your grievance. Right. It can still be grief.
Right. Excellent point. Thank you. So what I see as the counter to that is gratitude, and something you see lacking in our culture, in our society right now, is a sense of gratitude, gratefulness. So you also see attacks on patriotism and nationalism and being proud of any kind of accomplishments, right? They're tearing down every idea of accomplishment that would have someone feel gratitude for achieving that accomplishment. So I feel like these go hand in hand. It's like I said, I'm using the word demoralize with a distinction there of how it's usually used, which is I'm using it in the sense that you've been demoralized, meaning you no longer have a mindset or embody a moral virtue. Rather, you're embodying this vice, right? Is what we're going to call it. This lack of morality. So this, and in this sense, the grievance, which is again being pushed in one aspect of culture, and because of the polarization that creates, it's also creating the opposite polarity to focus in on grievance. So you have half the population, and now I'm just conjecturing, this isn't necessarily true numbers, but let's say half the population buying into critical theories and pushing this grievance and embodying a sense of grievance, right? And even the grievance isn't even necessarily foreign of themselves. A lot of it is grievance projected on others, right? And then you have the other half, the opposite polarity here, experiencing or embodying a grievance as well, in recognizing and seeing the injustice that is being pushed out of these movements, out of these ideologies, right? So one half saying, colonization or colonizers and white people are the source of all evil, and so we need to push this racism, and then you have on the other side people going, oh, well, hold on. I'm not a colonizer, I'm not a racist, and you're attacking me as if I am, right? You're labeling me and you're attacking me, and so they're in this sense of grievance too, because they're caught up in this ideology that's demonizing them, dehumanizing them. And so it's working on both polarities. It's demoralizing people on both sides of the spectrum here, as opposed to just working on one side of it. So there's this sense of gratitude is being buried under this sense of grievance, this experience of grievance, this embodiment of grievance. So, and I'm not saying that people don't have, an experience of gratitude, because I'm certain that there are people who, maybe when they go home at night, they get off work and they have, they love their family and they're, in this loving experience with maybe the person they're partnered with or whatever, they may have, this sense of gratitude. But the question is, when we're talking about the embodiment of these moral virtues, is how much time are you spending in gratitude versus how much time are you spending in that, in embodying grievance? Okay. So that's where anything on gratitude, grievance, Gingy or Patricia or Matt?
I'm
sure
clear.
there's other people here. Oh yeah, and there's Rachel and Charles.
Right. Dude, when you say grievance and you put critical race theory or any critical theories, what comes up for me is resentment.
Right.
And the polar of, say, gratitude, is entitlement, which I think our culture is demonstrating both of those, characteristics.
Yes, absolutely.
Well.
So yeah. So let's throw that in there with that it's not just, we're not going to say that it's just grievance, right? That is being pushed or comes out of that. But there is, like you said, that sense of entitlement as well, which I would say definitely belongs on the side of quote unquote vice, right? And there's
they're all vices, Jan.
Yeah. So it's definitely manifest in many different ways, and we'll actually go over several more. But I didn't have entitlement in my list, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it's definitely that resentment, that entitlement is definitely a part of it and a significant part of it. And again, this isn't a phenomenon exclusive to one group possessed by a certain ideology or another group possessed by some other ideology. This is something we're kind of seeing across the board. is this embodiment of that resentment, of that entitlement, of that grievance as well. So
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry. I don't want to hold up, but just to speak into that for a second, I would say that I'm noticing that myself. I work in an organization that is somewhat left-leaning, you could say, or somewhat progressive, and they're all over the place. So in Texas, they have to modify their operations because they have to fit the culture, they say, because we're a little more conservative and we ain't about that shit, yo. Like don't mess with how we do things here. So I find that interesting that this dynamic plays out, that even in this liberal culture. Well,
Yeah.
never mind. I'll let you continue. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, because I think it's really you're gonna see all these kind of tie in together for sure. So the next one I want to address is fear, and the virtue that balances on fear is courage, right? So if you're embodying fear, you're not embodying that moral virtue of courage, right? And this is probably the one that is doing the most damage in our culture, in our society now, because of the fear porn that is just being constantly pumped out to the masses, whether it be from the pandemic or anything else, that one definitely has messed people up. In fact, I'm certain that it's caused a level of psychosis in a large percentage of the population. So but it's this focusing in on fear. And again, this is across the spectrum. So you may have, let's say, the people who buy into the fear porn, right? And let's say from the standpoint of the pandemic, right? They buy in 100%. That they're in it. They're afraid. They believe they're going to die. They believe they're going to kill their grandma if they, don't wear a mask or don't get vaccinated or something like that. So they really live in this fear. And yet, if you look over at the side of the spectrum where people aren't necessarily buying into that fear porn, they're like, nah, that's all a bunch of bullshit. I ain't buying it. But those people are living in the fear of like what's coming because of these various political ideologies, pushing towards Marxism, pushing towards, making our children racist and sexualizing children. And so to the point where people are like, oh, well, this is the end of the world. This is the end of civilization. Get your bug out bag, get your food supplies. Like they're looking at it as like shit's going to all come crashing down. So they're living in a fear as well. On the other side of the spectrum of everything just falling apart. So again, this is fear is being broadcast across the spectrum and people are embodying fear. Again, I'm not saying 100% of the time. We see people, who stand up and make themselves heard or make themselves seen. And you may experience it in your life where you are courageous and you're not embodying fear. But again, the question is, how much of your day, how much of your time are you embodying fear versus how much of your day, how much of your time are you embodying courageousness as opposed to fear? So this is something that I think is definitely relevant to the current situations, to the propaganda being spread, to the narratives that are being that people are latching on to. And again, not on one side of the spectrum or the other. The nature of these narratives is that they're pushing everyone into this fear. Now, the reasoning for the fear may not be the same across the spectrum. It's different people fearing different things, but everyone's sitting in this fear, this place of fear, embodying that fear more often than embodying courageousness. And then next I'd like to, let's see, the next virtue I want to talk about, and I feel this one's pretty significant as well. And again, it's obvious when you look at what's happening in our society, in our culture, what's coming through the media, through education, and it's responsibility versus victim. And I could, pair up responsibility with accountability, but we're pushing a victim culture, right? And this is especially coming out of far left ideologies from critical theories. You have this victimization of people. And when you are the victim, you are not accountable. When you are the victim, you are not responsible. So this, again, if the moral virtue of responsibility or accountability is overshadowed by the embodiment or experience of being a victim, right?
Hey, Brandon.
And now, yeah.
Could you speak into that a little bit? What victim means? Because I know a lot of people. It's easy to lump it into like something happened to you. You're the victim of the situation, rather than I think what you're referring to is more of a mindset and a way of being.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you can actually also be let's say a victim of a circumstance, condition, a physical event. Like you could have been raped, you could have been molested, you could have been robbed, you could have been beaten, and you could consider yourself a victim, right? And I would say the significant distinction to make here is, do you live in that space of being a victim, of that mindset of I am a victim? Because if you live in that space, which is what they're pushing on people, they're saying, oh, because of your race, because of your sexual preferences, because of your gender, you are a victim, okay? And many people are buying into that. I'm a victim, I mean, I find it almost hilariously funny when you see these white women who are very successful at what they do. They make a lot of money. They're upwardly mobile in their chosen fields, and they've got many accomplishments behind them, and they stand there and claim to be victims of the patriarchy, right? So they've bought into a mindset of I am a victim. And so if you buy into that mindset and you embody victimness, and I think this may be one of those ones that's probably those who have taken on this mindset probably embody this all the time or most of the time, because it takes you away from responsibility and accountability, which is a lot more comfortable, right? Responsibility and accountability is not, even though we see it as a moral virtue, it's not a comfortable place. Even though it's a place of true power, you have power in your life when you're accountable and responsible, but it's not a comfortable place to be, because then everything you have, everything you experience, everything you create, everything, that's all, or including, not just in the physical realm, but in relationships and everything else, that's all a manifestation or that you are responsible for that. You are accountable for that, whether it's good or bad, right? Whether it's positive or negative. So when you don't have a job and you're not making money and you lose your house and all of that, if you're in that space of accountable, responsible, there's no one to point the finger at. So you have to look within and recognize that this is, I have the power to change this, and I am responsible for this, and I am accountable to this. And that's not comfortable, where it's a lot more comfortable to just say, well, it's because of, the cisgender white patriarchy. Just point the finger. It's the white guys. It's all their fault.
Well, I'd say it's probably the most comfortable place to be is to blame everybody else for your shortcomings and to take credit for all your success. That's the most comfortable place to be. And if you can walk around all the time and say, well, I did all this for myself because of X, Y, Z, or in spite of X, Y, and Z. But I didn't succeed over here also because of those things. It's like the picking and choosing of when to be accountable or not. And that's where I see everybody getting trapped in. Like
Right.
even some of the entrepreneurials, the heavyweight entrepreneurial types, they're always like, if you're going to blame someone for your failures, you should also blame them for your successes. And that is quite the mind fuck for some people to get their head around. Like, you mean I should be blaming everybody or blaming nobody? Like,
Right,
stick
right.
to one side of the fence.
I mean, could you imagine, one of these extremely successful white women who are, victims of the patriarchy turning around and saying, well, I'm a CEO and I make an extraordinarily high amount of money and I've got all these achievements and I've won all these awards because of white men. That would be comical, but you would never see that
because they set up.
Right. Yeah,
Hey,
I've gotten all
Brandon.
my accolades. Yes.
Is there a distinction between accountable and responsible? Because I hear you saying responsible and Gingy is saying accountable.
Yes, there is a distinction. I would say, okay, now how am I going to make this distinction here? Let me think about this for a second. Okay, so I'll start with accountability. So accountability is taking into account my outcomes, taking into account my results. I am accountable to them, or I am accountable for them. And those outcomes and results, again, are not just measured in, let's say material gains, but this is also measured in, outcomes and results in relationship. I see responsibility as kind of like a higher order of accountability, in that not only are you looking at, these measurable, well, sometimes measurable, I'll say, outcomes and results in your immediate purview, but responsibility is also taking into account things outside of your, let's say, your personal results and outcomes, like responsibility to your community, responsibility to your family. So responsibility is also something that gets focused outward on. So if you say, like, being, having responsibility in your family is like having a responsibility to the well-being of your family. Having a responsibility to your community is recognizing when there are things threatening the well-being of people within your community and stepping up and being responsible, able to respond to those threats to your community or your culture or your society. So I see it as a higher order, whereas accountability is like directly related to your personal outcomes and results. Responsibility is kind of at another level where it can be focused out on family, friendships, community, your society at large, the world itself. Like, I look at responsibility as also kind of encompasses our stewardship of the world. So, like, as human beings, the only beings on this planet with this high level of consciousness, of self-awareness, and the capacity to rein in our instincts, right? We're the only species on the planet, that has that capacity. And so there's, with that power, comes this responsibility of stewardship for the planet itself. It's kind of up to us, because no other animal has that awareness or consciousness to objectify the world itself and take into consideration how our actions affect it and how our actions can improve it. So responsibility I see as kind of a higher level kind of thing. Does that answer it, I think? Is that a clear distinction?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
That's interesting, because I've always used those two words from, well, I guess the statement of I'm accountable to or I'm responsible for has given me some type of distinction, where accountability is almost like a condition, like I'm accountable for these things, and a responsibility is more of like, if I'm accountable, then I take responsibility for whatever I'm jumbling up the words now, but accountable to, responsible for kind of shapes the way that I use it in language, at least.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's definitely the what do you call it? The prepositions that seem more fitting for each of those. The responsibility for versus accountability to. That kind of makes that, in a simple way, the distinctions that I kind of spoke into. And like, again, you could still be accountable to family members, right? Especially in what we have these, these social contracts, these familial contracts, unwritten, of course, but an understanding of what's right or wrong within our family, what's right or wrong within our community. And so those are, you're accountable in some sense to those as well. Whereas, again, I see kind of responsibility kind of a level above that, where it's not necessarily an expectation, I'll say, even though the social contract, because it's mostly unwritten for the most part, isn't necessarily expectation, but it is part of a shared worldview that you have within a family, that you have within a community.
Would you say it's fair to use the word obligation? Accountability is something that you're obligated to. So I'm obligated to my family. I'm obligated to show up to work on time. So therefore, I'm accountable if I fail in my obligations. Whereas responsibility is something that I could assume outside of a direct obligation. I could go above and beyond and take responsibility for a situation.
I would say it's definitely part of accountability. That obligations are definitely a part of accountability. However, I'm also looking at it as your personal outcomes and results, which there may have not been an underlying obligation there, but you're still accountable, because there may not be an obligation involved. I would say that's definitely in a significant part of accountability, but it's not exclusive to, meaning there's more to accountability, that there are things that you become accountable for and there may not be an underlying obligation there. Does that make sense? Or that's how I see it.
Yeah. Well, it's got me curious. I'm searching for an example, but I know that those in the hypotheticals, it's not easy to come up with one right offhand.
Right. Let me see if I can.
The definition of responsibility. You want to go first, Brandon?
Go ahead.
The definition of responsibility is the state or fact of having a duty to deal with something or having control over. It says someone, but I don't think it's necessarily someone or something. The state of fact of being accountable or to blame for something.
Yeah. See, I make a much more elevated distinction of responsibility than the dictionary does. That's for sure.
I think you might like this third one. It's the opportunity or ability to act independently and make decisions without authorization.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas accountable is, accountability, the fact or condition of being accountable. So I looked up what accountable means.
I love when they use the word in the definition.
I thought that was against the rules. To be speeding, to be caught in the act of speeding. Anyway, accountable of a person, organization, or institution required or expected to justify actions or decisions, or explicable, understandable, that doesn't make any fucking sense. The quality or state of being accountable, especially an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility or to account for one's actions publicly. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. That fits a little bit more with my distinction of accountability for sure.
Yeah, you have to come to account. right?
Yes.
You have
exactly.
to answer for what you said you were going to do.
Right. Exactly.
Responsible is like, I did the thing.
You know the thing.
Or responsible is like, I didn't have to do the thing, but I decided to do it anyway because I didn't like, dog shit everywhere. So I decided to pick it up. I took responsibility for
I
dog
wasn't
shit because I can't
accountable.
affect my neighbor, right?
I wasn't
I wasn't
accountable,
accountable
but
for it
stepped
because
up.
I don't have a dog. I
Right.
took responsibility for it because I want a clean community.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Bingo.
And now you can hold your neighbor with a dog accountable.
Exactly.
Brendan, is there a distinction between being responsible and taking responsibility?
Well, let's say that being responsible is like the embodiment, right? So that's the ontological side of responsibility. So, whereas taking responsibility is more like the dictionary definition of responsibility, where it's close to that accountability definition, where it's like holding yourself accountable, so taking responsibility, or you can see it as the ontic aspect of responsibility in action, right? So you could kind of make them like related, in that being responsible is a mindset of and willingness to be responsible for community, family, the world, and everything else. And the manifestation of that is in quote unquote taking responsibility, in that it's when you actually act it out in some way, like Matt picking up the dog shit. So that's kind of I'm taking responsibility for the cleanliness of my neighborhood, but that comes from being responsible, right? The embodiment of responsibility.
Thank you. By the way, I had a neighbor who was walking his dog shit on my front lawn, and he left it there.
Oh, what a dick.
I walked around to his house. He was like a block away. I walked to his house and I knocked on his door and I'm like, you need to come pick up the shit. Because I'm like, I don't have a dog. So because I don't want to pick it up, I'm not going to pick up your dog shit. So he did. He totally got it back in his car and came around.
I could see, depending on my relationship with the neighbor, like if it was someone I really didn't like, and there's an animosity there with that neighbor, I could see me grabbing a shovel, picking it up, walking over to his house, and flinging it at his front door.
Yeah, I would have left it on his doorstep.
Yeah, just right on his welcome mat.
Put it in a sack and set the sack on fire.
There you go.
So that
And
was
then
a
knock.
great
Ways to be
example.
responsible.
And then knock on his door so you don't burn his house down.
Yeah, you forgot the worst. You forgot the best part. Ring the doorbell and take off. Then he stomps it. You don't just set it on fire. That's not doing anybody any favors.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I remember
you're right.
my parents taught me that like, what do you call that? Not a joke, but a prank, right? My parents taught me that prank. So this is a prank that goes back to at least the 40s and 50s.
Brandon.
Maybe much further back. It might go back to the Roman Empire, ancient Egypt.
Well, as soon as paper bags are invented, but did they teach you that?
Right.
Did they teach you that trick like practically? Did they? Did they
Oh yeah,
on the door
no,
when
they
you were
did
home?
it. Yeah, no, they did it.
Nice.
They explained the dynamics of the prank itself.
Make sure they're home first.
Yeah.
Then you set the bag of shit up there. Paper sack, of course. Light it on fire so they stomp it out.
Plastic wouldn't work, and unless the poop's been sitting for a while, it's not very flammable. So.
Yeah, and also you want it to be fresh poop, because then it's all squishy and because the hard dry stuff that's been out for a few days, that's no fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's plausible.
Well, it liquefies when you set it on fire, to be fair.
Does it? Are you
Does
certain?
Well,
No, I just made that up.
The season
I really
grow.
did.
Matt, you're gonna have to film that and put it in the. I mean, that's the only thing you can do now is film it and put it in the chat. We gotta see it.
we could put it in there,
right?
with the burning snowballs video.
Right.
If I wasn't afraid of like getting the wrong house or ended up on Twitter or I don't know some sort of dire consequences, like that would still be funny. But that prank could go wrong in a million ways. I could see.
It can because fire's involved. Fire's one of those things.
Right now,
All right.
I'm an arson. Like I can't do that. I got kids. I got a family.
You're thinking through the criminal charges now. It's funny.
Yeah,
I mean,
life was much simpler in the days of my parents, for sure.
Right. Well, I mean, people are still like, you've seen the videos of people electrifying political signs in their yard, right? People come try to pick the signs up and somebody's run a few bajillion volts through it and somebody tries to come pick it up or vandalize their yard. They pick it up and they end up getting shot and knocked over.
A bajillion volts. I'd like, what are they plugging that thing into?
No,
Dude, I have seen those videos, and the first question that comes to my mind is liability. I'm like, I wonder how long
and trespassing. And
it's going to take for somebody to get sued. And they're going to think that prank isn't so funny anymore.
It's plausible. I didn't know there was an underground wire there. I just put the metal prongs of the sign in the ground. It just, went live. You didn't have to step on my lawn. Not that I would put up a sign in my lawn. It's just really, really funny.
All right, so I'm going to bring it back to morality.
Awesome.
Now that we've
dropped all the morals.
Now that we've outed ourselves as completely immoral people, let's get back to morality.
Actually, to really bring that full circle, there is a dude that pranks people that steals Amazon packages, and in one way that he does it, he gets a package and it's says like brand new cell phone, some manufacturer on the box, and when the thief takes it and gets it home, as soon as they open the box, it starts sounding off air horns and throwing glitter all over them and letting off these like fart machines, so the whole house starts smelling like fart. And they like end up throwing it out the window, and he's got a tracking device in it, so then he just goes and picks it up and repackages it for the next one. So that guy is actually warring against immorality.
Well, here's the thing.
I've seen people do that with like bikes, people that steal bikes, and they're like electrified as soon as they get on the bike. It's like, dude, if you're trying to steal stuff and you're like, I don't know, I feel like that might be different. It might be different in a court of law. That's all I'm saying.
Right. I would say, for me, in the hierarchy of moral virtues, I hold at one of the highest points in the hierarchy. I'm not necessarily at the top, but what I call transcendence, which includes humor, right? So I don't know. There may be a balance there. Remember, we talked last week about moral. What do you call it? Not moral problems, but moral dilemmas, right? So moral dilemmas are when, humor, if you hold that in a high place, is burning dog shit wrong? like humor is a pretty valuable virtue in my hierarchy of moral virtues. So I don't know. I might be able to justify the glitter exploding out of a box or even dog shit on the front porch, because there's a humor element there. And that's virtuous.
I'll see if I can find the YouTube videos.
What's that?
I'll see if I can find the YouTube videos, because there's something feel good about it. I don't know what it is.
There's something feel good about it. Awesome. Well, it's humor. I'm telling you, humor is important. Which again, looking at society, they're absolutely trying to destroy humor. Like, this new generation of comedians are, for the most part, absolutely horrible, and nothing funny comes out of their mouths. So again, destroying the virtue of humor And it's become, humor is now a form of virtue signaling, where the comedian spits out a bunch of garbage, virtue signaling, and then people virtue signal by laughing. It's like, this is all fake. This isn't really funny, and you know it.
That's the new Daily Show after they got rid of Jon Stewart.
Right?
It's just this woke nonsense. It's not funny.
Oh, I hate it.
And people are laughing at shit that's not funny.
I'm so disappointed in the Daily Show.
Yeah. Humor is dying. It's dying. Thank God we still have Bill Burrs and stuff out there. I don't know for how much longer, though.
Bill Burr is killing it. Dude,
Yeah,
Bill Burr is killing it.
Yeah, I'm sure that there is a concerted effort to cancel him in all his forms.
Yeah, but he was on The Mandalorian, so he's kind of got a pass with a lot of the
yeah, well,
SJWs.
so was Gina Carano.
Yeah, we talked about that. I mean, come on, man. She does not need to be canceled ever.
No. All righty. Next up on the list, forgiveness versus blame. So again, you're seeing this push within society, through the media, even through academia, and I mean at all levels. This isn't only in the universities anymore. This is happening at the elementary school level, where now we're fixated on blame. And if you're fixated on blame and you embody that vice, right, then you're not embodying forgiveness. And you even see it in cancel culture, where somebody does something that's probably not even a bad thing. Most of the time, like, I don't know if you guys saw the Kimmy Schmidt, right? Isn't that the name of that show? Being outed as a racist because she was like debutante of a ball, and like just ridiculousness, right? Pure ridiculousness. The guy who got canceled off his own show, one of those stupid reality shows. I want to say it was Bachelorette or The Bachelor or something. For basically saying
Roseanne got killed off her own show, and it was called Roseanne.
Yeah. So so here's the thing. Here's the distinction here, right? That I don't know if Roseanne did. I'm pretty sure she didn't. But a lot of these people who get the crosshairs on them and get fired upon by the woke, they immediately turn into bumbling idiots and start apologizing, right? And what you will never see is forgiveness coming out of this woke religion, out of this cancel culture, right? There is no forgiveness. There is no forgiveness. And that's
I just heard about the dude from The Bachelor or Bachelorette or whatever his name is, Chris something, I think.
Right. Yeah.
And I heard everybody making a big storm about it, and I was like, you know what? I don't want to take anyone's word for it. I want to go watch what the dude said himself.
Right.
And all he was saying through the entire interview that he got blacklisted for was, hold on, guys, you can't just judge her because, she was a 18, 19-year-old kid going to a party in college. She wasn't there making statements. She wasn't there being, it was some, like, I forget the party that she had gone to.
It was a antebellum. So before the Civil War party. Yeah.
Right. So everybody was dressed up as slave owners is the message that came across.
That's the interpretation of it. You could just say, well, these are people dressed up like people did in the 19th century, right?
Well, the way that I looked at it, I was like, that makes just as much sense as like the girl who dressed up as Pocahontas, or me in 6th grade dressing up like a rapper. Like, it was fun to dress up. But all this dude was doing was standing up for her, being like, maybe we should hear what she has to say about it before we jump to conclusions and try to like cancel her. She survived. He did not. Right.
And not only that, but he came out and apologized, because he didn't leave the show right away, or he didn't get kicked off the show right away. Right after that interview, he came out on his knees, apologizing profusely for nothing. You know,
I
'cause
did see
he
that.
didn't
Yeah.
say or do anything wrong. And like I said, there was absolutely no forgiveness there. Right? And so that's something we definitely have to be mindful of, especially because of this, like, just this intense polarization in ideological possession that we're seeing across the board, is being mindful of our own forgiveness of people who hold, you know, ideas we don't agree with, right? And even dangerous ideas or, you know, really immoral ideas. You know, people are really pushing racism and things like that. We have to recognize that if it ever happens, that we are forgiving of these people, whether or not they relinquish that ideology, right? Whether or not they ever come back, like when we recognize that we hold resentment towards someone because of their ideas, because of their beliefs, like we can in that moment go into a place of forgiveness, right? Because it is, again, it's much more powerful for us, and it's needed for our culture to heal, for our society to move forward in a productive and effective and way that where we can create a world where we start thriving as opposed to, you know, barely surviving and at each other's throats. We need to embody that forgiveness all the time. and I'm a firm believer that when we start to embody these moral virtues that we're talking about, that it has an effect on the people around us, whether or not you share ideologies with these people or not. It has an effect, right? So rather than holding resentment for someone because of their beliefs or because of what they say, we may feel it in that moment, recognize it, and maybe, you know, forgive, you know, like recognize that they aren't necessarily bad people. You know, in fact, most of these people who are possessed by ideologies, and again, I'm not just talking about the far left ideologies, because there are many people on the right who are possessed by ideology as well, that has them also embodying many of these vices, right? As opposed to embodying any kind of moral virtue. And I think we need to, you know, be that example in life to start embodying these moral virtues, so that other people around us, for one, people have at a deep level, these moral virtues are like absolutes, right? And people want to be virtuous. People want to be moral. And when you be that way around them and offer them the opportunity to be that way as well, people want to be there and they want to be in that place for the most part. And so it's something that if we're mindful about it, you know, we can start to have an impact on people around us, so that we can start to transform our culture to a place where we start embodying these moral virtues again, as opposed to being locked into embodying these vices that are being just pushed and hammered and reinforced. And like I said, and it's happening across the board. You know, I see an extraordinary amount of grievance and fear and victimhood and blame and greed and animosity and hostility and all of that. I see it on both sides. I see it across the spectrum, you know, not to necessarily polarize things on only two polarities. There's definitely a spectrum there of where people's ideologies are and what ideologies they're possessed by, but you're seeing it across the board, that there is a heavy possession and this embodiment of these vices that are manifesting, and really kind of it can only take us one place, right? And it's you know, down the toilet bowl. You know, it leads to the destruction of culture and society. You know, if we no longer have that moral framework, if we no longer embody those virtues, then there's little. The eventual outcome is the is the destruction of the pulling apart of our culture and our society. Okay, moving on.
Dude,
Okay,
quick thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't want to interrupt because you were on a good run there, but I looked up the Chris Harrison apology.
Uh-huh.
After watching the actual video of what he's apologizing for, this saddens me deeply to know that even after this, they cut him as the host or whatever. And I don't give two shits about the Bachelor or Bachelorette or whatever show he was doing. Like, good riddance. I'm sorry, Patricia. Sorry, not sorry. Really is more like it. But here, let me just read this because it says, this is his words. Quote, "I am saddened and shocked at how insensitive I was in that interview with Rachel Lindsay. And I didn't speak from my heart," meaning I did not speak from my heart. "And that is to say, I stand against all forms of racism," Harrison said. Quote, "And I am deeply sorry. I am sorry to Rachel Lindsay, and I am sorry to the Black community." For what?
Exactly. It's pathetic. And this is a regular occurrence. Like, yeah, this is one example, but this is a regular occurrence. Somebody does something of no consequence, gets attacked by the woke mob. They turn around and pathetically apologize for something they didn't do. And then there is no forgiveness. Right? They've been demonized. Yeah, it's demonization, dehumanization.
I don't know. There's not a lot of shit in this world that makes me sad, but this does.
Right? It's pathetic. And like I said, and it happens a lot. I definitely appreciate those who stand up and don't apologize and don't cave to the woke mob. The
reason why I feel like this. Well, I was just going to quick say that the reason why I feel like this is saddening over, like, I don't know, say starving people in Ethiopia or something, is that this was a complete sacrifice of authenticity and personal belief and autonomy for the sake of crowd pleasing.
Yeah.
And
mob pleasing.
Yeah.
Right. Because it is a mob. It is a mindless mob.
Oh, you guys saw the John Cena apology, right?
Oh, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, I can Google that now.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. It's
only apology. That's
Mandarin.
He apologizes for recognizing Taiwan as a country.
And he learned another language to
Right, he apologized in Mandarin. He literally spoke Chinese.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a joke.
Anyway, you guys are talking about apologies to like mob mentality.
Yeah.
This is CPP mob apology right here.
Yeah.
Never apologize to the mob.
Yeah, pathetic excuse for a human being.
Is Taiwan not a country?
For John Cena, gone. Taiwan is a country.
Yes, it's a country, but not if you ask China.
Oh my God. Why? I just looked it up and I'm like, fuck, man, I should apologize too. I've been calling Taiwan a country since high school.
And by the way, Taiwan is also one of the biggest hubs for microchip manufacturing. And if you guys aren't aware, there's a giant chip shortage that's disrupting supply chains everywhere. So Taiwan's battlegrounds for the next. Yeah. I mean, you could call it it's a military, national security interest, to be quite frank. If you can control the chip manufacturing of the entire world, well, you control technology, you control everything.
Absolutely. All right. Next on my list, and this one goes without saying, greed versus generosity. And I mean, greed has just become just this embedded part of our culture, in that people seek out and acquire for self more than give for others. And so and this actually, I think this also goes hand in hand with that entitlement, right? So I think that if greed is at odds with generosity, I see entitlement also at odds with generosity. And so, and we know that definitely, especially within the younger generations coming up now, that there's this, sense of entitlement that is really a contradiction of generosity. So you don't see much generosity. However, because it is one of those moral virtues that is embedded within us, right? These are absolutes. These moral virtues live within us. They're always there. And it's just about connecting in with them. Like, it's funny because a person just acting out their life, they may live out of that sense of entitlement and that greed day to day, but when given the opportunity to be generous, many will step right into it. It was interesting. I was on a call last night, and somebody brought up a study that someone had done around generosity. I don't know if that was the study was based on. That's what I saw when they told me about the results of the study. But they basically went to a college campus, and they had a moving truck and a couch outside the moving truck, right? And they kept asking these college students, like, hey, I'll give you $20, help me move this couch into the moving truck, right? And no one, not one person accepted the offer of $20 to help move the couch, right? A couple days later, moving truck, couch outside a university, and they offered no money. They just said, hey, man, can you help me out moving this couch into the moving truck? And almost every single person they asked wanted to help without the offer of any remuneration of any kind. So I thought that was very interesting.
I'm confused. Why?
Because people want to be virtuous. They want to be generous. Like, the $20 made it into an obligation, for one, right? Because there's an exchange now occurring. So it makes it contractual. It makes it an obligation. Like, not sure if I want to have that obligation of helping you move that couch. Like, now there's expectations, right? You're giving me $20. I have an obligation. There's expectations. Like, there's a lot more there. It's a much more complex transaction. I mean, it's transactional in that, hey, man, can you just help me out? That's not transactional. You have the freedom in that moment to say, yeah, no, I don't have time, or hey, my arm hurts, or whatever. You can make up excuses. You don't have to. But again, that morality, those moral virtues are a part of who we are. They're always there. And given the opportunity, people were more than willing, right, to be helpful, to be generous, to give of themselves, to give of their time.
That's
make any more sense? Yeah, no, I thought it was awesome. And that's what I took from it, was that because of I don't remember what they were trying to figure out with this study, because they also did an experiment with like Hershey's Kisses, like for free versus 5 cents each. And when they had, free Hershey's Kisses, people would take like 2 or 3, 2 or 3, 2 or 3, 2 or 3. But when you were selling them for 5 cents each, people were putting down $5 bills and taking big old handfuls of it. So
if I was in the situation of the couch and somebody walked up and said, hey, can you help me? I'd be like, yeah, sure, no problem. And I would jump right in and I'd help out, unless I was, on the way to go do something. But if someone said, hey, can I give you $20 to help me with this couch? The first thing that goes through my mind is my time worth $20?
Right. I would most likely say, hey, man, I'll help you out. You ain't got to give me the 20. That's
where I would probably conclude too.
That's how I would approach it, yeah. Because I don't want to take $20 from you. And again, you see it all the time. Like somebody breaks down on the side of the road and you pull over and you help them out. I remember there were these guys trying to push a truck. I was in Albuquerque at the time, and they were trying to push their truck. It evidently wasn't running or something, or I can't remember if they were trying to jump start it or something. I parked it behind them and, jumped out of the car and helped them out, without there was no obligation. There was no expectation. It was just like, I'm going to help these guys out. And again, I think it's because that moral virtue is a part of who we are and it's always there. So we want it to manifest, in fact, we could say that that's the goodness that wants to move through us, right? And we spoke about that last week when we got into the nature of morality itself and meaning. And we talked about the logos and how it manifests this morality through us. And that's, and it is good. And it is the good that moves through us. So I see it as more of it is definitely a human trait and a human tendency. But when we become focused in on and embody these opposites, then it's not as present, and it makes it more difficult for these things to manifest from us. Like, because people are so focused on blame, right? With the Bachelor guy, they don't even see forgiveness as a possibility. It does not live within them. They're blocking forgiveness because they're so enraged by blame. They're so embodied by blame. They're so filled up with these negative aspects of morality, or these immoralities, or these vices, whatever you want to call them, that's why forgiveness doesn't even come out. They don't see it. They don't recognize it. It's like, oh, he said sorry. Okay. Oh, good thing, Chris. We forgive you. It's all good. Go back to your stupid ass show. No, rather they're like, no, cancel him anyways. Like,
now he knows what he did.
Exactly. Yeah. Fuck that guy. Get him out of here. As opposed to like actually forgiving. It's fodder. You're feeding the beast. You're feeding the mob with that ridiculous display, of apology. You've given them more power, and so because they're living in those vices, right? They're living in that negative embodiment, that amorality, or really immorality, right? They're demoralized, right? The moral virtues aren't present. They're not embodied. And because there's so much of those immoral vices within them, that they block themselves off from their own moral virtues, so to speak.
Let me ask this. What would affect the embodiment of let's go back to gratitude, actually. That was a good example. I've had two friends. I distinctly remember this moment. We were sitting on our front porch. I was living with both of them at the time in Denver. And there was a car driving down the street, and it turned a corner, and you could hear it wreck. So it was probably about a half a block from where we were. I had one friend that took off running towards the crash because, according to him, he just wanted to help out. And then my other friend, my other roommate, took off running inside being like, the cops are going to show up, or whatever his mentality was. Now, they're both really caring, giving guys. But I'm curious, what would have somebody run towards a crash to help versus someone to run away, versus me sitting in between being like, which way do I go? I didn't know if to run towards the crash and help out, or to run away because of a sense of danger, perhaps. I don't know. So what might affect that type of dynamic to where someone is, conditioned basically to always run towards and to give and all of that, and another person may not be?
Right. I would say it's definitely, you can look at it in probably many ways, but I would say one way you can look at it is that what's driving you in that moment. Like your friend who ran inside, he may have been stoned out of his mind and like had a bag of weed in his pocket. He's all, fuck, cops are coming. I don't want to get caught with this shit. Oh, it was legal? Oh, so this was
Yeah.
not long ago.
No, it was like 2014 or something like that.
Right. So but his drive is fear. So again, remember, what's the opposite of courageousness is
Right.
that fear. So he's not embodying that courageousness. He embodies fear, and he may embody fear most of the time. Whereas your other friend, he may embody courageousness and generosity and more of these virtues more of the time than not, or in that moment at least. He was not being driven by a fear or entitlement or greed or anything that would counteract his courage and generosity.
Yeah, so it may very well be that they're, what I was calling neutral, or this resting place, is one buddy may be resting in courage and confidence and safety, and the other one may be resting in fear and skittishness or something like that. Right,
absolutely. Yeah, and actually we could throw responsibility in there too for the friend who ran towards it.
Yeah.
He dwells in that responsibility. He embodies responsibility for people in his community, right? So he sees it as like, oh, somebody's hurt in my community, and runs towards it because he has a sense of responsibility, So I would definitely, in that moment, I would say that the friend that ran towards the accident was embodying more virtues, more of those moral virtues than the friend who ran inside. And you seem to have been torn between the two.
Just confused.
Benji was analyzing.
Yeah.
Yep. That's my go-to.
Okay. Yeah. Why did that guy run inside? Why is that guy running towards it? What should I do?
I don't even think I thought about what to do. I was just kind of like, where's everybody going? I thought we were hanging out.
Because weed was legal.
Yeah, we had all been smoking weed at that time. It was freshly recreationally legal, and we were all sitting on the front stoop saluting cop cars as they drove by. Those were the good old days. Good old days.
Yep.
That's fascinating, though.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Next on my list is kindness. Okay. And wow, we sure could use more kindness in the world. And again, especially for those you don't agree with, or towards those that you don't agree with, especially towards those that hold what you consider to be poisonous ideologies, or who act and speak in ways that you find repulsive or reprehensible. That being kind, right, towards others. Rather, what you're seeing is this general hostility and animosity for other. And this goes heavily with this dehumanization, right? So you have a dehumanization, again, happening across the spectrum, right? For 5 years, right, they've been pumping out Nazi and communist and white supremacist and racist and bigot.
Fascist.
And so fascist. They're pumping out these dehumanizing ideas. This is animosity. This is hostility towards other, right? And if you dwell and embody that animosity, that hostility, there's no room for kindness, right? So it's automatic, right? I think a great example is the politicization of, or oh my gosh. I always have a problem with that word. Yeah, well, yeah, that, but with the ION on it.
Politicization?
So, yeah, there you go. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't know why. I can't say it. There's something about that word. I always mess it up. Okay, so the politicization of masks, right? So it became a virtue signal of one group possessed by one ideology, and a fuck you from a group possessed by another ideology, meaning fuck you, I ain't wearing it. So you can go fuck yourself. And in that, there is this animosity and this hostility, right? Like as soon as the CDC finally came out and said, yeah, masks are no longer necessary. And then you have all these people, I'm going to keep wearing mine. Why? Because then they know who to hold animosity towards. They know who to be hostile towards. And then everything got reversed, whereas the people who were wearing the masks would hold hostility and animosity towards those who didn't. And now the people who have, never wore the masks were now holding animosity and hostility towards those wearing them, and so this dehumanization has already run a pretty deep course within our culture, within our society. It's scary. It's really at the level like, how many months are we away from genocide? like this is paving that road. We are paving the road to genocide by embodying these vices. This hostility and animosity is how people are dehumanizing other people, right? And again, regardless of what somebody says, what somebody thinks, like embodying that kindness, which again, you can see how all of these kind of go hand in hand, right? Because kindness becomes much easier when there's forgiveness, right? And generosity. Like kindness, if you're embodying forgiveness and generosity, kindness just kind of flows out easily, whereas if you're caught up in blame and entitlement and hostility, there's not much chance you'll ever see any kindness out of that. And again, not to say that you're living 100% of your day or time in either of these, but be mindful, pay attention to how much time do you spend with hostility or animosity towards others versus being kind towards others. Next, and this is an interesting one and probably not as obvious, but definitely present. And you're actually seeing it in some of the attacks on elements of our culture. And I'm the opposing virtue and vice here are prudence versus impulsiveness or carelessness, right? So you've now seen that delayed gratification is a sign of white supremacy, in case y'all didn't know.
What? Explain that. I missed that one.
Dude, okay, well, you got to go look up the white supremacy chart. It basically explains that like timeliness is white supremacy. So if you're on time, well, then you're a white supremacist. If you believe in math or science, then you're a white supremacist.
The ability to delay gratification.
Yeah, no, that is part of the white supremacist culture.
I thought that was just like a signifier. If you have this ability, then you're more likely to whatever.
Be successful. Yeah, well, it is a virtue. I call that virtue prudence. I'll say it's part of the virtue I call prudence, which prudence is kind of like being able to be rational, be logical, think about consequences, think about, what's happening, what you need to do in this moment in order to have something in the future, be mindful of how the present affects the future. So that's why delayed gratification kind of fits in there, because you will sacrifice something in this moment because of something that you will need in the future. So for instance, you sacrifice your time for work because you're going to need to pay the bills and buy food and things like that. So you willingly sacrifice the present moment and do some work so that in the long run you're fed, you have housing, you have a vehicle, right? So that's part of prudence is just being mindful of how your actions, how your choices will affect outcomes not only in this moment but also in the future as well. And they're literally, so they're attacking this idea of delayed gratification or of delaying gratification. So they're really, what are they doing? They're advocating impulsiveness. They're advocating carelessness. And you can see it in all the idiots in the streets, right? They're acting purely out of impulsiveness and carelessness, as opposed to being prudent and thinking about how my actions in this moment will affect my future or the future of my community. So it's more subtle, but it is definitely there. They're advocating, only taking into consideration this moment and not taking into consideration the outcomes or results of your actions. It's all about it's all about acting out of your feelings, right? So rationalization, reasoning kind of go out the window with these ideological attacks. Somebody was going to say something?
I was just looking for the delayed gratification is white supremacy, but all I found was this thing that the Smithsonian's apologizing for.
Yeah, I think you found it. I'm pretty sure it was a Smithsonian infographic.
Yep. It's called White Culture in the United States, and it basically says white dominant culture, or whiteness, refers to the ways white people and their traditions, attitudes, and way of life have been normalized over time and are now considered standard practices in the United States. The graphic says, and since white people still hold most of the institutional power in America, we have all internalized some aspects of white culture, including people of color. God, some of this stuff is hard for me to swallow. I'm like, but yet they all listen to rap music and jazz and blues.
Wait, it doesn't have the list. It doesn't have the list of all the bad white stuff.
It's here, but it takes me to Twitter. Let me see if I can open this.
Yeah,
rugged individualism, family structure, emphasis on scientific method, history. Wow, scientific method.
Yeah.
Protestant work ethic.
Protestant.
Religion. Oh, Protestant, yeah. Religion, status, power, and authority. Future orientation. You mean planning for the future, delayed gratification, process is always best. Tomorrow will be better. Time, aesthetics.
Optimism. Did you hear that? Tomorrow will be better, which is basically optimism. So optimism is white supremacy. So they're attacking optimism. Jesus. I didn't even put that on my list.
Holidays, justice, and competition.
Justice. Jesus.
Based on English common law, protect property and entitlements, and intent courts.
Yep. I mean, if that's it. And notice the way they word it, right? Of it's been normalized as if these are bad things. Like, because again, the dialectic as it works within neo-Marxism out of the critical theories is it's an incomplete dialectic. It's problem, whiteness, solution, destroy all institutions and culture. And then, reaction, destroy all institutions and culture. Solution, yeah, we don't have one. So this is the broken dialectic of neo-Marxism in that they really believe that just tear the ideologues believe. I don't think the people who necessarily are pulling the strings behind the scenes believe any of this bullshit, but the ideologues believe that, especially those who push the theories, who write the books, right, the intersectionality books and whatnot, they really believe that in order for the utopia to emerge, you must just tear down and destroy everything. They have no other plan. The plan is, like I said, they've even broken the dialectic in that they've got the problem, they've got the reaction, but no solution. And so there is no method or path or way to achieve the utopia. It's just, if you just destroy everything and you tear everything down, a utopia will emerge. And that's why they hate science and reason and logic and math. Because if you apply any kind of reason or rationale to this shit, you're like, are you retarded? Like, you're an idiot.
Notice their specific word choice of an emphasis on the scientific method. Not science, but an emphasis.
Because
I'm like,
the science is their institutional science, right? It's sciencism. They believe in sciencism. The where you got the high priest Fauci, at the head of the church, and they believe in the science.
There's another page. The last one is communication, and that's the King's English, the rules. So you have written tradition, avoiding conflict, meaning intimacy, don't show emotion, don't discuss your personal life, and be polite. Those are all white traits. Apparently,
that's terrible for culture. That's terrible.
Intimacy, being polite, and not discussing your personal life is something we all picked up from white people.
Yeah, evidently those don't exist in other cultures. Which again, it was funny because Asian friends are like, "Wait, what? Wait, hold up, we're on time." And it's not because of white people. We're on time. And we work hard. And it's not because of white people.
I posted it in the chat. Everybody can take a look at aspects and assumptions of whiteness and white culture in the United States.
It's awesome. It's awesome. God. All righty.
Seeing as I'm like half white, this is like halfway offensive to me.
I'm halfway offended. No, you should be offended.
This is that porch scenario all over again. I'm like, do I run towards the incident, or do I run away like my friend? I'm just stuck right here in the middle. I don't know whether to be offended or to like pick the other side.
Right. In reality, though, you should be offended by both, because for one, it's the bigotry of low expectation, right? That, you're black. The black part of you, Gingy, is completely irresponsible, could never achieve things. Like, in fact, they're telling you, black people, they can't get IDs. They don't know how to use the internet. They say shit like that, right? So, but the white half should also be offended in that, like, they're playing these things off like you are a person with a work ethic, and you are a person who values your time and looks ahead and rationalizes and reasons, and you should be offended that they're demonizing that, right? Because those are virtues. Those are positive traits that you embody. So by attacking those virtues, they're attacking you. They're attacking your embodiment of those virtues. So you should be offended 100%, both halves.
I'm just kind of blown away. I mean, some of this stuff, I've gone in here a little bit more, and it's like a nuclear family, father, mother, 2.3 children. I'm like, that's so racist to assume that we got that mother, father, and 2 kids thing from white people.
Right. And it's patently ridiculous. Not only is it racist, not only is it bigoted, it's patently ridiculous. Yeah. No, there were no families until Europeans figured it out.
At least not with 2 kids and both a mother and a father.
Right. Yeah.
Don't forget the 0.5 kids. You must have half a kid in order for it to be completely white, Gingy.
Yeah, it's 2.5. 2.5 or 2.3. I think it might be lower now. I think it's 2.3.
It's 2.3. Yeah. So luckily we never had 3/10 of a kid in my family, so we're pretty solid. My parents just stuck with the mother, father, and a daughter and a son. So
it's just a set of guys walking around, a torso.
All righty. Moving on. Where were we? Prudence, right? Okay, so moving on to, I like this one. I feel like it could be kind of difficult to speak into, and I feel like it's one of those virtues that doesn't get enough airtime, and it's dignity. And there's definitely an attack on dignity. And dignity is important. It's significant because this is where we have self-worth, right? Value of self. So there's a dignity where we hold ourselves as valuable. We hold ourselves as significant. And there's definitely an attack on dignity in that there is this, and this one's more insidious because it happens at a psychological level more than anything else. But you see the sense of worthlessness, right, and insignificance, and this also partially comes out of that lack of any kind of spiritual foundation within culture, where if there is no spiritual foundation to life, if there is no spiritual foundation to you, then there is no value. There is no inherent value. There is no infinite value of humanity there. You become insignificant. You become worthless, right? And this is paving the way to genocide. When you start to see, when you not only start to hold yourself without dignity, you see yourself as insignificant, you see yourself as worthless, well, then you're opening the door to seeing other people that way as well, where the other becomes insignificant, becomes of no worth or value. And by doing that, this again lays the groundwork, lays the foundation for genocide, because you're insignificant and everyone else is insignificant. So if we need to, break a few eggs to make an omelet, not that big a deal, right? And this is, you see this immorality playing its way throughout all levels of society. It's the only way you could really justify global genocide, in these, what to me are clearly population control efforts that are currently underway, really culling the population. So when you hold that yourself or others are merely, have no worth or have no value or are insignificant, then it's very easy to get rid of them, plain and simple. So it's like I said, I feel like it's one of those virtues that doesn't get a lot of airtime. You don't hear people talk about dignity a lot, but I feel it's extraordinarily significant because it takes recognizing the infinite value of self and having a sense of self-worth in order to recognize it in others as well.
This is something I hear talked a lot about in older generations. Like my grandparents were very much into their dignity, I'll say.
Right.
And
you see culture really, like, look at like the Cardi B's of the world, right? And girls emulating that. And then whatever the male version of Cardi B is, I'm so out of touch with pop culture. I'm sure there is an equivalent. I don't know who it is.
Kanye West.
Okay, sure. And
No,
so you have, boys emulating these male whores, and you have girls emulating Cardi B, and these people have no dignity. They have no sense of self-worth, right? And so in emulating that, you're perpetuating that lack of self-worth, that worthlessness, that insignificance, that lack of value within yourself and others. So this is, like I said, this happens more at a psychological level. It's not as obvious in its manifestation.
What as you say, it's a lack of dignity in the Cardi B's and the whoever else's.
Have you seen WAP?
Yeah.
Like in
I
real
even
life?
saw I
Oh,
even saw Ben Shapiro do it.
Oh, you saw Ben Shapiro do it?
Yeah, it's hilarious. He's reading from it. He's like, and from this wet ass P word.
amazing. You're right. You're right about dignity, though. I mean, it is completely it's subtle because it's sold as something. It's sold as freedom, right? Twerking is supposed to be something that a fulfilled woman might do, but it's something degrading, right?
Self-respecting, prideful
Right.
woman will do that in front of a group of people.
Right, exactly. And yeah, God, the conversations I've had with my daughters about this, I'm just so happy they're not into that stuff. Oh my God. But yeah, it's insane. It's
Well, just curious because like what Nick was saying is that it is kind of passed off as this like overly confident type of individual who gives no shits about what anybody says and taking my power back type of thing. What has you say that it's a lack of dignity, a lack of self-respect? Just curious.
It is that, and I don't know. It depends on how you define confidence, because it may look like confidence, but it's the lack of self-worth is like that's showing up as acting out the way they are, as compensating for their sense of worthlessness, of insignificance, right? So it manifests as this animal-like behavior, right? I mean, you don't talk about yourself in that way. You don't show yourself in that way if you hold yourself as valuable, significant, and you have a high sense of self-worth. Because then you wouldn't have to whore yourself to get to. What are you whoring for? You're whoring for acknowledgement, for affirmation, for recognition, for eyeballs, for attention, right? If you need all those things, you don't have a high sense of self-worth, right? I don't know if you guys saw the video from Chicago from a couple days ago where you had the chicks twerking on the cop car.
Yeah, I saw that.
Okay. So again, no sense of self-worth. How do I know that? Because they're whoring for attention. They're look at the way they dress, look at the way they act in public, right? This is a lack of self-worth, right? So they're whoring for that affirmation, for that acknowledgement, for those eyes, for that attention, right?
It's almost as if I can't really picture what it would be like for someone to have the level of dignity like we're talking about, or really just dignity in general. Because it is it is like this new wave of self-respect almost to whore yourself, like you're saying. To put yourself out there to get attention on social media or in person, or even doing it for boyfriends and friends and the attention and the likes and the snaps and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would say it's in Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules of Life. He hints at it. I don't think he's really getting to the point of it, but he says, stand up straight and hold your shoulders back, right? What is that? That's dignity, right? So stand up straight, hold your shoulders back. That's embodying. Well, again, this is my interpretation of whatever rule number this is. That's my interpretation of it, is like embody that dignity, recognize your worth, recognize your value, hold yourself in that high place. Because when you do, you don't need that attention. You don't need those affirmations. You don't need thumbs ups and smiley faces on your Facebook posts. In fact, you don't even need to make Facebook posts. You don't even need a Facebook account or a Twitter account.
You know what?
Right?
It's almost as if they've attached their worth to their physical body. And so however they
no,
look,
not only that, Yeah, they're also attaching their worth to their social media profiles.
Yeah. Their online appearance.
Yes, the image.
And,
It's all
and
about
not
that
even
image.
the appearance, not even the image, but the response they get back for that.
Yeah, well, that's why they curate the image, right? Because that's all a social media profile is you're curating a mythology of yourself, and it's the acknowledgement, the attention, the thumbs ups and the smiley faces and the hearts. Like that is more of that feeding that sense, that lack of self-worth, right? That feeling of insignificance. You're trying to feed that. You'll never feed it. It'll never be satiated. Because you don't value yourself. You don't hold yourself up high. You have no dignity. If you had the dignity, the hearts and the smiley faces and the thumbs up would be meaningless. They'd be completely insignificant.
Yeah, so really it's when somebody places so much value on that stuff. Let me ask you this, though. How does one pull away from that orientation, needing others' approval or validation? And I mean, it seems like it could be a self-defeating cycle of, every time I get a like or some type of response, the more likely I am to do this to get another response. And it's like, doing cocaine until you're like drowning yourself in powder and you're not even getting high anymore. I've never done cocaine, but just from what I hear, it's like.
Well, I've got the answer for you in 4 words. Have some dignity, bitch. Plain and simple. It's when
the 4 words I heard also had bitch in it. I was like, 4 words, love thyself, bitch. Like.
Exactly. It could be those 4 words too. Have some dignity, bitch. Love thyself, bitch. Because that's what all it is. It's recognizing the worth within yourself. Because then you don't need that acknowledgement from without. You don't need that attention from without. So you recognize value within the self. You love yourself. You accept yourself. You hold yourself as significant and valuable. And again, this also goes kind of hand in hand with our conversation last week with purpose and meaning, where that is definitely where your purpose and meaning is intrinsic to that sense of self-worth and significance in the world.
Fascinating. I see that too. The times I've been most confident, authentic, grounded, dignified is when I knew exactly what I was here to do and I was working on it. Not only just like involved in it, but I was pursuing it with a passion, with a fight. It's like there's another aspect of self that comes alive when like the purpose is identified and you're not only like, oh, how should I apply this? But you're actively engaged in it.
Right.
So can I chime in?
Sure.
Hi, Salo.
Hi, how are you guys doing this evening?
Good. How are you?
Great. I'm glad to hear that. I'm just extremely into the conversation here, just quietly listening. But one thing that occurs to me is that really you can't really talk too much about dignity without mentioning respect and honor, right? Because they're almost like three parts of a triangle.
They definitely go together. Yeah, I'd say you can't, without respect and honor, there is no dignity, for certain.
And so these folks that are looking for this respect and honor, really, in a way, you could look at them as being negatively polarized and just in general having some unidentified need in their life, be it social or interpersonal, spiritual, physical, or some other way, physiological, that this causes them to move toward that positive charge that they get when they get a like or they get some type of reinforcement socially.
Right.
So
how would you guys define honor?
I'm sorry?
Define what?
How would you define honor?
So it's in terms of the social construct, I think it's just a hierarchical system full of protocols and behavior and title and outward recognition that's inherently understood or recognized within the social construct that allows, I guess, for lack of a better term, a person or entity to be able to move within that system, hierarchical system of honor and gain certain other titles and benefits and privileges and corresponding duties.
As far as it relates to like dignity and respect, that's what you're meaning?
I
Right.
would break it down a little simpler, and I would just say it's acknowledgement of other holding other high. And the way I would distinguish it from respect is that respect comes from to respect, spect being to look at, right? To look at again. And so respect is a willingness to see, right? To see someone, to recognize, to look within, right? And it goes for self as well, to see that which is inherent, that which is valuable, to recognize, as opposed to the honoring, which honoring is also, not only seeing, but you're acknowledging and elevating. You're holding them high, right? Like honor thy mother, honor thy father, which the way I would interpret that is to, also honor traditions, that which has come from the past. You elevate it, not that you must retain it. It can change and transform with time, but you honor it because you recognize the value in it. So you elevate its value.
So here's a question. It's kind of like if a tree falls in the woods, do you hear the sound, right? You've heard the old cliche.
Don't get us started on that.
Does a man or a woman that is alone and in solitude and entirely removed from any contact with anyone else, can they actually exercise dignity?
Good question. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Because it's a sense of, because in reality, this really is one of those virtues that does not require anything outside of yourself, because it's about, for one, recognition of your own value and worth. Like that is essential part of dignity and your own significance.
Viktor Frankl wrote a whole book on that. There's literally an entire book about that, and it's great. Viktor Frankl's a good reference for that.
Is it? He only wrote the one book, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but that was essentially what it was. It was, yeah, that's what it was.
I guess the point I'm trying to get at is that if there wasn't this reinforcement that takes place, and if there wasn't some type of reward that they're getting to help fill that void in the lives of people that are going out and displaying this behavior, then gosh, you gotta wonder,
Well, here's the thing. It's not that it would go away, because what are they filling? The hole they're trying to fill would still be there. There was a world before Facebook. There was a world before Twitter. There was a world before the internet. And right now, this hole that I like the phrase that what's his name? His name escapes me right now, but he talks about a God-shaped hole within our culture that people have, right? And it's this abandonment of any kind of spiritual foundation. So and when you abandon any kind of spiritual foundation, you also abandon dignity, because there is no inherent value, right? You have no inherent value. You have no inherent significance or worth. Right, so when you have that hole, right, that lack of dignity can't be filled, right? That sense of worthlessness, or that sense of insignificance, whether or not you have these external tools which you're trying to fill it with, because These things will never fill that hole. I don't care if you get 1 billion likes on your tweet or you get 1 billion thumbs up on your Facebook post. That hole will never be filled, right? I don't care if Cardi B gets a platinum album or gets 1 billion views on her YouTube music video. That hole will never be filled.
I agree. At least not by that. I wouldn't say it would never be filled, but it certainly won't be filled that way.
Right. What I'm saying is if that's what you're looking to fill it with, it will never fill.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
But as everything, deteriorates kind of in this social construct we've got going on, and there's no longer a unifying, message in terms like, back in my day, you had Billy Graham as a prominent voice within the country, kind of spiritual leadership, if you would. I would certainly say nationally, you got respect both in the secular world as well as in the spiritual circles. And whether or not you subscribe to being a Christian per se, as your particular religion, certainly the message is being brought of morality and of loving thy neighbor and of self-sacrifice and of higher calling and infinite potential that we all have, being basically filled with God's Spirit every day, whether we recognize it or not. So it's just a in a way, when I see all these different manifestations of behavior out there, I almost feel pity, because I'm seeing a shrouded manifestation of behavior that's trying to fill something, and it's just a futile dance that you see taking place, almost as if somebody was having involuntary spasms. They're not even in control really anymore.
Right. It's funny because back during the Dark Ages, during the plague, they had this pandemic of what did they call it? They had a word for it. It was because this is this is before psychology, but it totally escapes me right now. But it was basically fits of dancing, where entire groups of people, entire communities would dance, and some would dance themselves to death. And it was in reaction to the bleakness of the world around them. It was a mania, right, that had overtaken them, right? And it was if you look at it in psychological terms, what they're doing is reacting from irrationally to their sense of dread, right? And so that's how this occurred, and they had a name for it. I can't remember what the hell it was called, and it's actually a funny name, but it's strangely reflective of what we're seeing in our culture, right? That there's, at some level, there's a mania. I'm not saying it's overtaken everyone, but like you look at like these Black Lives Matter and these Antifa gatherings, and there's a mania that overtakes the mob. And it's because they have such a bleak outlook of the world, that this spirit of destruction overtakes them. This spirit of carelessness, of hostility, right? It almost takes over the entire mob as if a hive mind.
You almost wonder if it's not creation itself, if you subscribe to that point of view, that is that the earth itself, has harmonics to it, and it resonates at a certain frequency, and you wonder almost as if imperceptible to us that frequency is being perturbed in some way, being oscillated differently, and without even knowing it, almost like watching ants in a pile. When they're disturbed, the ants get into a frenzy, and you watch
Right.
the activity levels just absolutely just mind-boggling how quickly these ants are moving. But unlike the ants, we are unorganized in our reaction, and we're just all running for. If you were to zoom it down and see us from above, I guess we look like a bunch of ants just running around screaming our heads off in
Right.
panic.
Yeah.
instead of
And definitely, and a mindset can definitely act as a perturbation towards activity, right? So it definitely, like I feel at this moment in history, there's a large percentage of people that are experiencing this cognitive dissonance because what they do and what they say is in direct contradiction to these deeply in these deep moral values that exist within them. And this by failing to recognize it and acting and speaking in contradiction to it, you create a perturbation, to use your language here, that is out of sync. So if when you're in a state of ease and grace and peace and comfort and contentment, we'll call that a coherent. The energy is moving through you coherently, right? And when you're in a high state of anxiety, there's a lack of coherence. It is scrambled. It is discordant, right? And so that cognitive dissonance creates a discord within you. There's no coherence to the energy that moves through you. And so, like you were using the analogy of the ants scrambling, that lack of coherence within oneself can definitely create that panic, that scramble, that anxiety, right? And in a group, it's interesting. I don't know if you guys know this, and I don't even know if I know it, but this is my understanding of like crickets versus locusts, that they're basically the same creature, right? But when you get enough, not crickets, I'm sorry, grasshoppers, grasshoppers and locusts, basically the same biological creature to a point. As soon as you get enough grasshoppers together in a certain amount of space, so meaning when enough grasshoppers come within a certain distance of each other, there is actually a biological change, like at the level of DNA. All of these grasshoppers become something else. Like even their coloring will change, and they are no longer individualized. They now act as a single organism. And this is the locust, right? And this is why locusts swarm and how they destroy entire crops. So literally there is at some point there, and whether it's a discordant energy that creates this, or whether it's when you get that much, a large coherence of some kind of energy that it creates it. I don't know which way to, whether or not to judge it, seeing as it often manifests as what we perceive as a destructive force. It may be a discordant, like having that many grasshoppers in such a small area creates a discordant kind of energy, right? To where there's a shift in their very being at a biological level. And so I kind of, not necessarily that, at a BLM riot, I'm not saying that these people necessarily change at a biological level and their DNA shifts, although I'm not certain it doesn't. It may, because that may happen with groups of human beings. Like there may be the mob, when you bring enough people in a discord that have a discordant energy about them and a general anxiety, and you get a lot of them together in a small area, it may create the same kind of an effect where you're no longer an individual. It's like a hive mind. And so now you're acting as a single organism, this destructive organism like the locust.
Well,
right? And you go around as a mob, violently attacking people and buildings and all these things. And it's not even necessarily that you're acting from a space of individuality anymore, that this discordance has created this discordant harmonic that is shifted and changed everyone, and I'd be interested to see some experiments on this and see if there is a genetic shift like the grasshoppers and locusts.
Well, I mean, there's a great example of it being concordant in the form of women sharing quarters. And there are 3 women and 2. There are 3 girls and 2 boys in my house, and that means they hold the majority, but they synchronize. It's ridiculous. It's scary, actually. It's chemical. They somehow speak to one another. I don't know if they have secret meetings or what, but their cycles are synchronized. It's unquestionable. Well, if we spend time away from the kids our daughters, and for any significant period of time, and we haven't yet, it's biological. It's subtle. It's something that happens on a level that my conscious and aware and perfectly normal group of girls at the house they can't control it. It happens anyway, regardless. And I think that happens in a lot of people, just like smelling, like the idea of smelling fear or bloodlust, things like that. People going crazy and wanting a scapegoat. I think that's something. I think people, our species specifically, likes to think they're above something like that. But live in close quarters with a bunch of girls, and you'll realize that no, there's a lot of biology going on here. There's a lot of stuff that, despite our high-minded, highfalutin thoughts about ourselves as some kind of creatures being above biology, that biology is going to happen anyway. And I think it happens in a lot of ways, like you said, in a discordant way. You get a bunch of people together. There's nothing stupider than a group of people. Or nothing, how does that saying go? There's nothing stupider than a group of smart people working together, right? It's people get dumb when they become a mob, right? And there are few people who can resist that level of biology. I really think it's chemical, and it happens in my house every month, man. It's
dude, just to tie in on that, my mom and my godmother got pregnant around the same time, and had me and this other, now she's a woman, Kaya, on the same day with the same midwife. Midwife literally finished.
You mean your cousin?
My godfather's daughter.
Oh, I thought you said your mom and her sister.
No,
you didn't say. Oh, okay, I was like, that's your cousin, Gingy.
Awkward. No, my mom and my dad had me. You got pregnant with me around the same time, but definitely not the same day as my godmother and godfather got pregnant with Kaya, and we were both born in the same day. Their cycles lined up, and when they woke up in the morning, we're like, "Oh, I'm in labor." They did the whole process, had a kid, and then as soon as she was done, my mom's like, "I've been in labor all day too. Come over here." And the wife literally washed her hands and went over and delivered me.
Oh my God!
So what if it's possible? What if it's possible? Kind of like that, all the movies that you're seeing nowadays about zombies, that instead of a biological threat where people are infected with some type of agent that makes them, change and become zombies, that it's actually some participation in the mob mindset that basically makes them as crazy as you could argue a zombie, and their desire is really only to destroy and to consume.
Yeah, it's called Black Friday.
Yeah, and you know what? I'd be willing to put money on it that there is you would actually be able to perceive of a shift or change in the DNA. However, your DNA, it's interesting. So, most people don't realize the DNA is not static. It is not set and always the same. Your DNA shifts and changes over time. And when it does, it's almost miraculous in that the shift occurs all over the body simultaneously. As if there's some, invisible signal that goes out and just everything changes and shifts together, all the DNA molecules. But however, you would have to take a sample while they're in this mob state and test it while they're in the mob state. Because, you know, with what's the quantum theory when you separate?
Entanglement.
Oh, entanglement.
Yeah, entanglement.
All you need is just to bring Trump into the room and a bunch of blood vials.
Come here, you raging liberal. Let me get a sample of your spit. I don't know if that would work out. I don't know. That would be, and you know, so
just tell him it's a COVID test.
Right.
No, yeah.
Tell him it's fine.
Just you know, all you have to do is just say something like, "I refuse to say her name," and then they'll start screaming in your face, and you get plenty of spit.
Ew.
All right. So moving on from dignity, we got a couple left here. I want to touch on empathy. So empathy is that capacity within us to feel what another feels. And again, look around, definitely lacking in what is arisen in its place, what is being embodied rather than empathy is apathy and disdain, right? So there's definitely a disdain that people feel towards each other, right? And an apathy, just an I don't care, right? So there, I would say that where would I place empathy on the hierarchy of morality? I definitely think it's significant. And it kind of is intertwined with and goes along with generosity, forgiveness, and kindness. Like there's typically you don't see those things without some level of empathy there. And if you do, I would say that it may be an inauthentic form of it. Like just giving something to someone is not necessarily the embodiment of generosity, right? Especially if there's an intention behind it that like, oh, I'm going to give them this so that I get something in return. I don't see that as embodying the virtue of generosity. But if there's an empathy there, like when you see someone living on the streets and you give without any expectation or anything, typically there'll be an experience there of recognizing and feeling what it is to be in that place, you know, living on the street, without a home, without family, without friends, whatever it may be. And that empathy kind of goes along with some of those other virtues. I would say if empathy is present, it allows some of those other virtues to emerge more easily, definitely. And I think the disdain and the apathy that are kind of being pushed kind of go along with this, you know, it's really hand in hand with like what we see is in the form of animosity and hostility, that it's manifesting through the same channels, through, you know, by the same means, so to speak. This is an interesting one, and it's probably, it's obvious, but I don't know. I would definitely put it lower on the hierarchy scale of moralities, and only in that what I see is like, okay, what's our trajectory as a culture, as a society, and where do we need to put our most focus and attention? So when I take that into consideration, a certain hierarchy of morality kind of manifests for me. And I wouldn't necessarily put this one that high, but it is obvious, and it's justice versus lawlessness, right? So a sense of justice. So I recognize within myself, I've always had a deep sense of justice. Like and not only for myself, you know, recognizing when I'm being treated fairly, when I'm not being treated fairly, but also recognizing it for others. And like, being emboldened and passionate about rectifying injustice, right? And so I see that as definitely something that for some reason has always manifest within me strongly. I'm sure based on my astrological charts that there's Libra in there. And so it would, just because it seems to manifest just like my bullheadedness of my Taurus manifests, there's probably something to that and why it manifests within me so strongly. But I don't necessarily, when I take into consideration all these other moral virtues that we've discussed tonight, I mean, it's important, it's important for there to be fairness and justice. But right now, it's definitely that lack of justice and that lack of fairness and that lawlessness that manifests is definitely hindering and taking culture and society in a bad direction. But I don't see it as significant as the others. I don't know what you guys think about it. Again, not that it's not important, and I feel all these moral virtues are important, but I kind of like, okay, yeah, that's an issue, but I don't know if it's as significant as the gratitude grievance or the courage fear or responsibility, or forgiveness. I feel like all of those kind of rate above and beyond justice at this moment when I consider the trajectory of culture.
Yeah, empathy is almost like you could say the base bud of a flower called compassion, right? You can't have compassion without feeling empathy.
Yeah,
and vice versa. I think that they're almost interdependent on one another to exist.
oh, absolutely.
And so,
yeah, I left compassion out of my list because I felt like it's a kind of an amalgamation of many of the ones we've talked about, including empathy.
right. So,
but we're on justice right now. So I wanted to know what you guys thought about the significance or the importance of justice.
well, the university's constant equilibrium, right? You put water and you put it in any bowl, in any structure. It seeks its level. It's always seeking its level, and for it not to be that way, I think causes everyone discord.
Absolutely.
I'm curious.
Alrighty.
I feel like justice is kind of misconstrued. I don't know. To me, when I think justice, I feel like everyone's thinking about it like revenge. Justice for the murder of so and so, and it's like, to me, that's not really what justice.
Yeah, that's what do they call that?
That's revenge.
That's retribution. That's retribution and punishment, and that's not necessarily what justice is. Not the distinction I make of it. When I make a distinction of justice as a moral virtue, I'm definitely not seeing it as revenge or retribution or punishment in any way, shape, or form. Now, that may be when you elevate that morality, or maybe elevate's not the right word. When you manifest that moral virtue into society, it becomes law and order and courts and things like that. So, because again, the way I see it, all of these moral virtues manifest in culture and they manifest in society. And so justice is one of the most important ones within the societal structure. That moral virtue manifests as what we call a justice system, right? I don't know how just the justice system is, but all of our moral virtues manifest in different ways within our culture and within our society. And justice is one of those ones that's really obvious, because we have laws and we have courts, and so that's what that moral virtue manifests as an orderly society. It suppresses chaos, I'll say. Alrighty, last one. and it's humility or humbleness, right? And I would say what's in contradiction and filling the space rather than being humble, having humility, is pretentiousness. So this, and again, you see this across the spectrum. This is not unique to any one group or one ideology. There's a pretentiousness across the entire spectrum. And it's a false sense of superiority, right? You have people on, let's say, we'll just take a couple ideologies here, people on the far left, right, the woke, and they have a sense of superiority, a false sense of superiority over the non-woke, right? And then you have, let's say, on the other side of the spectrum, you have people who are, let's say, politically conservative, who have a false sense of superiority in maybe their values, in their political opinions, right? So we have to be careful of this one, okay? And again, it's not to take away from dignity. Remember, dignity is important. And I would put dignity up there with humility. However, it's what we have to be careful of is that sense of superiority, right? Rather than it's important to have dignity. So it's important to recognize self-worth and value and significance for yourself, but it's also really important to recognize that in others. And if you recognize that in others, then there is no sense of superiority, regardless of what they believe and what they think and what they say. So that's one that it manifests more subtly. It's harder to recognize, harder to see. But ask yourself, how much time do you spend in a sense of superiority over others because of your ideas, because of their ideas, because of your lifestyle, because of their lifestyle, because of your choices, because of their choices? This happens, and it happens a lot. And it's something that we're often not mindful of or present to, but is occupying a space for us to be able to be humble.
Yeah, the humility, the honor, the dignity, the respect, those things all tie in with this as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Alrighty.
I do catch myself slipping into that sometimes.
Oh,
even
yeah.
in these conversations, I'm like,
oh yeah, it's easy.
Assets.
I do it all the time. Because it's very easy it's almost like the more you know about various beliefs and ideologies and things like that, and the more you look at them, the more you study them, you recognize more and more flaws within them. And so it's easy to project out flaws on people who believe it. You know what I mean? Like, what are you, an idiot? Like, you think you're not being racist by saying those things? Like, it's very easy to degrade or to denigrate someone because of having an understanding of their ideology and recognizing fault in what they say, or recognizing flaws or inconsistencies or contradictions in what people think and what they say. And we often take that and project it on them as if they are less than because of that, right? So
how do you return to humility from there?
Yeah. Here's one of my favorite things. Now, again, I'm from Southern California originally, so I didn't grow up seeing this, and I didn't see it until I was in my early 30s, right? And, I was doing workshops all around the country, and so I was meeting people from all over the place, right? And, dealing with like Southerners, right? So Southern culture was something I didn't have a lot of exposure to growing up. And I was in this conversation one time. Actually, I was kind of on the outside of the conversation. And it was this lovely Southern woman, so polite, so kind, right? And there's this guy who's talking to her, and he said some pretty cringy shit, like just some like you want to smack him in the head, like you're a fucking idiot, right? Like that. I immediately felt that, right? And again, I went to that place of denigrating him because of the stupid shit that came out of his mouth, right? And she, without missing a beat and not judging him and not thinking any less of him, right? She says, "Oh, bless your heart." Right? And in that moment, I'm like, oh my God. Like, that's a nice way of saying you're a dumb shit. Like bless your heart, because the shit that comes out of your mouth is foolish. You know what I mean? Like, that was kind of how in that moment, it felt like she had given a twist. She had spun around, like, and rather than be in judgment or make him wrong or anything else, she created something positive out of it because of her own humility, because she didn't need to be right about something. She didn't need to make him wrong about something, right? She just said, "Oh, bless your heart," you know. And I was like, that experience blew me away, because I was just like, oh, wow, that's such a significant phrase.
That's Southern hospitality, man. That's Southern hospitality. Yeah. You experienced a blessed heart. I grew up in that, and that's a great old Southern women, dude. They know exactly how to dismiss, or not even dismiss. Like, it's become a thing. I think people have become wise to it. They know what that means. It's kind of it's a middle finger, but no, they have. It's a move now.
But it's the nicest middle finger you can ever give. And I think depending on the person saying it, of course, in that moment though, I knew that there was no animosity. There was nothing negative behind it. Like, she genuinely humbled herself.
Yep.
You know, in the face of his ignorance, and said, "Oh, bless your heart," you know. And so there, like, you can, again, there's definitely, it's not just the words, because there was a lot, like, you can just say words, and if there's nothing authentic or substantial behind it, they're just words, and they're not going to have the same effect or impact. And in that situation, there was definitely substance behind it, you know. And so there was
I don't agree with you, sir, but I wish you the best. And that's
exactly,
that's how we are. That's just quintessential.
Yeah, but not even saying I don't agree, because saying I don't agree at some level is like kinda like somebody can interpret that as, what you know, you're saying I'm wrong? Like, that's how people take it when you don't agree with them.
Right.
Like, no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I don't agree.
Right, but they're not going to make it an issue. That's just a lack of hospitality. You're not going to make it an issue. People misinterpret "bless your heart" as "fuck you," right? They do it all the time, and I see it online. I'm like, you guys aren't getting. There's a lot of levels there. I mean, yeah, it's there. It can be dismissive. I've had my heart blessed multiple times by my by my bourbon swilling country club grandmother, but it's kind of a way to say check yourself, right? Or but it's also very, like you said, it's very humble. This isn't something that they say it the way it says. I'm not here to fight you over this, right? And maybe one day you'll change your mind. It's not important enough. It's to quote, what was it, Stanford, the thing that Gingy posted. It's avoiding conflict in a lot of ways, right? It's extremely white, apparently. You're avoiding conflict. I love it, and I don't use it myself because it's very feminine. It's something that's kind of the domain of women down here. Right. But it's also a disappearing art. Right? Because, like you said, a man can be cringy, he can catcall or whatever, and she's not wishing him ill. You know, she's not necessarily. I mean, it may be gross, but she's assuming in a Christian context, she's assuming that eventually the light of Christ will illuminate him and he'll understand his ways. There's a lot of depth here. It's a lot of stuff here.
You're
But yeah,
blessing his ignorance out of his body so he can be enlightened with the truth.
Yeah, kind of. Like it's returning evil for evil to no one. It's a very, again, the thing you posted, Gingy, it's very Protestant. And I grew up in this milieu, so it's very, it's turning the other cheek, not wishing evil on evil to anyone. It's praying for your enemy. It's literally praying for your enemy. That's literally what it is. And it's beautiful. And I've heard people, women specifically from other parts of the country, hear it and use it as a literal middle finger. And
Right.
they'll use it wrong. And I find it offensive, but that's my truth. But no. But
Say it again. Say it again.
Turning it on purpose. No, I'm serious though. I hear people misuse it, and it's so good. It's such a good expression, and it's very much the domain of women. My wife, pardon the expression, is a Yankee. She's literally a Connecticut Yankee. She doesn't use it. She hates it. She's had it used around her, and she finds it disgusting. And because everything's straightforward, Connecticut's basically a suburb of New York. Everything's straightforward. You have something to say to me, I'll say it, and she can't, bless your heart is, so wait, what? Are you mad at me? No, honey, that's not what they mean. They're praying for their enemy. They're doing something nice, and they're being hospitable. And yeah, I love that. It's one of my favorite things about the South. I'm from here, born here, live here. I don't like it here, but just in general, but I love certain parts of it. And that's that and fried food is amazing here. And barbecue. Barbecue is phenomenal here, but
I could just imagine an SJW being blessed like that. How they would.
And they are. Oh God, they are. And the thing is, when you say bless your heart, you recognize that person, the SJW, initially comes from a place of wanting to help. They do, and their need to help is corrupted, very much corrupted. There's no better soldier than somebody with an ideal, right? And if you can co-opt that ideal into something that furthers some sort of agenda, oh man, you got yourself some passionate zealot soldiers running around talking about racism and stuff. And to a Southerner, racism is something that is touchy. It's very touchy, and especially everybody in the South is very touchy. And it's funny too, because I was looking at last year when all these cities were burning, Atlanta lost a Wendy's. We lost a Wendy's. That's all that happened in Atlanta. And the reason is because all these technically mainly two races have been living together shoulder to shoulder for a long time and have come to a sense of agreement, peace. We borrow from one another. We hang out with one another. It's all fun and games. We have friends of other races. People we die for, people we cook for, people whose kids we take care of. And it's you think what's considered the most racist part of the country by other parts of the country actually isn't. It's very cohesive because we've all come to an agreement, And I see things like Portland or other places burning, and I think bless their heart, it's not. They're not. I don't know. It's subtlety, and there's a lot of layers there, and I think it's funny that you mentioned that because it's one of the best expressions. I'm going to teach my daughters that. They're Southern born and raised, and I don't know if I can actually teach them that now because their mother's a Yankee. I don't know if that works. Maybe it's matrilineal. I don't know, but
just start blessing, my man. Just start blessing.
Well, and here's the thing: in reality, look at it from the sense of context, because it's really about the intention behind it. Because you can make up any phrase, and it's about the intention behind it. That if somebody says something that you find, reprehensible, if you find offensive, you find stupid, whatever. Here's a way of maintaining your own humility not denigrating them because of what they say or believe. Here's a way of responding that's respectful, honorable, and you're recognizing the dignity and value of this individual as opposed to judging them and holding them in a negative space. Okay, with that, I'm going to wrap. I think we got a bow in this. Any final thoughts, Gingy, before we move into something else?
Nope, we can go into after hours. I got about an hour.
All righty. So, again, thank you, everyone, for all your contributions. And I got a tremendous amount of value out of tonight's discussion. And we'll talk to all of you again very soon. Good night.